My name is Ophelia and I'm 29 years old. The smell of roasted turkey still makes my jaw tighten because that was the night my brother stood up at Thanksgiving and announced our parents had secretly given him the company I built and that I was getting nothing. We were seated around my parents' long oak table, the same one where I'd once balanced invoices and laptops while everyone else watched football, and the candles flickered like they knew something awful was coming. My brother cleared his throat with that practiced confidence he always wore like a tailored suit, lifted his glass, and said it loudly enough to pin every conversation to the wall. Before we eat, I just want to thank Mom and Dad for believing in me and officially handing me the company. And then, with a smile that cut, he added, Ophelia won't be involved anymore. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not because I was surprised. Betrayal has a smell too, metallic and familiar, but because the timing was surgical, chosen to humiliate. My parents didn't look at me, not even when he said I was getting nothing, as if the word itself were a verdict already stamped. I built that company from a borrowed desk in a drafty studio, nights powered by cheap coffee and stubborn hope, while my brother was finding himself on my dime. And now he was standing there like a hero in a story he'd never written. I thought of the first client I landed by promising a turnaround I barely knew how to deliver. The contracts I negotiated with hands shaking under the table. The payroll weeks when I paid my team before myself because I couldn't bear to let them down. All of it flashed through me as my mother dabbed her lips with a napkin and my father studied the grain of the wood as if it could absolve him. My brother kept talking, embellishing the narrative, saying our parents wanted stability, wanted a real leader, wanted someone who could take it to the next level. And I could hear the air in the room thin, forks hovering, relatives holding their breath. Family dinners have a way of becoming trials without juries. My aunt's eyes flicked toward me. My cousin coughed. The silence begged me to play my part, to shrink, to swallow it. Instead, I took a sip of wine, slow enough to feel the cool glass against my lips. I tasted the courage I'd been hoarding for years. Because that was the moment the words on the thumbnail of my life formed themselves exactly as they would later be repeated. My brother stood up at Thanksgiving and announced our parents had secretly given him the company I built and that I was getting nothing. So I took another sip of wine, looked at my dad, and said calmly, should I tell them now, or do you want to? The question landed like a dropped plate, shattering the careful story my brother was telling. For the first time that night, my father looked at me. His eyes held the panic of a man who knows a locked drawer has just been rattled. He stammered something about timing, about family, about gratitude. But the room had shifted toward me. Gravity recalibrated. I could feel years of being the quiet one peel away. I remembered the emails I'd saved, the signatures I'd insisted on when my parents pushed me to keep things informal, the clauses I'd added late at night because I trusted paper more than promises. I remembered my brother's name missing from the documents when it mattered and mysteriously appearing when it didn't. And I understood then that their plan relied on my silence more than his speech. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Calm can be louder than shouting. I let the pause stretch until even the turkey seemed to cool. Then I asked again, gently. Should I tell them now, or do you want to? My brother's smile wavered. The room leaned in. And in that held breath, I felt something unfamiliar, control. Because the truth, once invited, has a way of walking in without asking permission. And I knew that whatever happened next, the story would no longer be told about me without me in the room. The room stayed frozen after my question. And in that silence, I finally understood how much power comes from refusing to be erased. My dad opened his mouth, closed it, then tried to laugh it off. But the laugh cracked. My brother shifted his weight like a man realizing the ground beneath him wasn't solid anymore. I set my glass down carefully and told them there were things everyone deserved to hear. Because this wasn't just about hurt feelings. It was about truth. I explained how the company hadn't been a family project, the way they like to say, but something I started alone at 23 with a loan I repaid myself. How every early contract listed me as founder and sole owner. How my parents only came in later offering advice that slowly turned into pressure. And how my brother's sudden promotion had happened behind my back while I was negotiating our biggest expansion. I watched faces change as details replaced assumptions. The narrative slipped from my brother's grip as relatives leaned forward asking questions he couldn't answer. My mother tried to interrupt, saying this wasn't the place, that Thanksgiving was about togetherness. But I pointed out, still calm, still steady, that they had chosen this place when they announced I was getting nothing. Togetherness built on lies is just a prettier word for control. My brother snapped that I was exaggerating, that the company needed a stronger presence, that he was only stepping up. That's when I slid the folder I'd brought, unopened until that moment, across the table toward my dad. I told him he could explain the signatures himself. Or I could. Inside were copies of incorporation papers, equity agreements, and emails acknowledging my sole ownership. As my dad flipped through them, his shoulders sagged. The weight of proof bent him forward while my brother's confidence drained into anger. Someone gasped when they realized my brother had been named interim CEO without legal authority. Another relative murmured, "This looks bad, very bad." I didn't enjoy their discomfort. But I also didn't soften the truth. I told them I had discovered the transfer attempt weeks earlier, had already consulted counsel, and had waited until Thanksgiving only because I hoped they would choose honesty before spectacle. Since they hadn't, I was done protecting feelings at the cost of my future. The argument erupted then. Voices overlapped. My brother insisted he had been promised everything since childhood. My parents pleaded they were only trying to keep peace. And I repeated again and again that peace without fairness is just silence being forced. Eventually, my uncle stood up and told everyone to stop. He reminded them that facts mattered more than pride. And in that pause, my dad finally admitted what he had tried to hide. That the company was legally mine. That any attempt to give it away would fail. And that they had hoped pressure would make me comply. Hearing it out loud felt like a door closing behind me. Final. And freeing. I stood up, thanked everyone for listening, and said I was leaving because the rest could be handled through lawyers, not leftovers. I walked out into the cold night with my coat half buttoned, heart racing but spine straight. For the first time in years, I felt light. Like I had finally set down a burden I didn't know I was carrying. The weeks that followed were messy. Angry messages. Forced apologies. Eventually silence. But the outcome was clear. My brother lost the illusion of inheritance.